This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a renowned actress, singer, dancer, director, writer, and educator whom we all fell in love with as Grace, the owner of Grace's Café on the highly popular TV series Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. We also remember her as Bessie Freeman on Palmerstown, USA, Doreen Jackson in Generations, and Felicia Richardson in the popular podcast series Forever and a Day. But beyond those iconic roles, our guest has had a diverse and distinguished career. On Broadway, she received a Tony Award nomination for her performance as Sylvia, the Princess of Milan, in Two Gentlemen of Verona, for which she also received a Drama Desk Award, a Theatre World Award, and New York and Outer Critics Circle Awards. And her other Broadway credits include the great show George M. On the big screen, she's appeared in many movies, including The Cross and the Switchblade, Come Back Charleston Blue, Next Time, Mr. Barrington, Float, and of course, The River Niger, which earned her an NAACP Image Award. And on television, besides the shows I mentioned, she's appeared in many classic series, including Policewoman, Barney Miller, All in the Family, Trapper John M.D., Hill Street Blues, Cagney and Lacey, ER, American Crime Story, and many more. And she's appeared in some great TV movies like Cage Without a Key, Foster and Laurie, Vampire, Brave New World, Victims, The Midnight Hour, and The Divorce. And most recently, she's been a professor in the Theater of Fine Arts department at Saddleback College in California. I am delighted and honored to welcome the incomparable Jonelle Allen to our show. Ms. Allen, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. And I thank you so much for having me. And we have to say that Kayla is going to be visiting with us too, because she has a lot to say.
We're very happy to welcome Kayla. I'm quite a cat lover myself, so she's more than welcome. You have the distinction of having made your Broadway debut at the age of 6, opposite the grand dame of Broadway, Helen Hayes, in The Wisteria Trees. Now, I know the show didn't last very long, but what's your recollection of working with Helen Hayes?
Well, the thing that I remember most about working with Miss Hayes, the Wisteria Trees, it was the revival that they did for a limited group of performances at the City Center. Miss Hayes had done the show on Broadway, I think in the late 1940s. It was Joshua Logan's Americanization of Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard. And so Miss Hayes was a rather diminutive woman. And so one of the opportunities is because I was shorter than Miss Hayes, who was extremely diminutive. Anyway, what happened was I was really 5 years old, but I had to lie and say I was 6 for Actors Equity, But I had been on a television show for kids called The Merry Mailman, and I was rather animated. And so it turns out that my little kid, the other kids were dancing behind me, and I pushed myself to the front. Hello. And while this agent for children, her name was Miss Rita Newton, she saw me on this little kid pushing her way to the front on The Merry Mailman and contacted the show. And then the show contacted me, well, I should say my mom, to say that this children's manager wanted to meet me. And so I met her, and they were going to be doing a revival of Wisteria Trees with Helen Hayes. And could I go and audition for it? I'd never done an audition or anything like that before, but had the opportunity. So I'm on stage, and my mom worked, and my Auntie B took me everywhere. And so my Auntie B is sitting out in the house in the theater of the city center, and the director of the show was a man named John Stix. And so when he said to me, "Can you read?" And I was really, I took great umbrage with that. I was like, "Yes, I can read." And so he said, "Okay, well, I want you to say this line." And I'm looking at the script and I see the line. And he says, "But before you say the last word in the line, I want you to wait a minute." And I do not know where this came from this little 5-year-old. I just said to him, "You mean take a beat?"
Wow.
I don't know where it came from, but immediately there was this laughter coming from the wings. And in walks Helen Hayes, just, like, and as I said, she was diminutive. I was a little shorter than her. And she looked and she just started laughing. And she says to my aunt, she says, this child, keep her in the theater." Well, she didn't say theater. I'm saying she said theater. "Keep this child in the theater. She has a gift." And
boy, was she right.
But what was really sort of interesting, like to bookend that moment, was opening night of Two Gentlemen of Verona on Broadway. And and after show opens, you go to Sardi's to wait for the reviews. And I walk in, people applaud, it's very nice. But I see Helen Hayes, and she's walking out, and she looks at me and she says, "Wonderful performance." And I ran after her and I said, Miss Hayes, you may not remember me, but I was in the revival of the wisteria trees with you, and you told my Auntie B to keep me in the theater because I had a gift." And she looked at me, and as she got into her cab, she said, "I was right." And off into the night she went.
What a story. What a memory. Well, I have to tell you, the first time I saw you on TV was in 1976 when you appeared on Sammy Davis Jr.'s variety show. I know you were just a kid, but you did a dance routine with Sammy on the Walter Winchell show. And he played Bill Robinson and you were playing Shirley Temple, right?
So I'm the original Shirley Temple Black.
You really were. You really. What was it like working with Sammy?
It was really good. The thing is I got that particular part because my tap dance teacher was Charlie Atkins, who was a part of the dance team, Coles and Atkins with Honey Coles. They approached him or whatever, asked him if they knew of a little girl who could tap dance, because Sammy wanted to do a takeoff of Bill Robinson and Shirley Temple on the Walter Winchell show, but he wanted a little black girl that he could dance with. So Charlie said, "Yes, I'm working with someone right now who I think would be good." So at that time, Sammy was doing Mr. Wonderful on Broadway. So it was like I had to come to meet Sammy to audition for him. But what happened was, which was very smart of Charlie worked with me on the routine, on the Bill Robinson, Shirley Temple routine. And we came up with, doing all the little steps and stuff that Shirley did with Bill Robinson and, all of that kind of stuff. And we worked on that. And so when we went to meet with him backstage, and Charlie says, "Let's show you what she can do." And so without any music or whatever, and just, him clapping, I did the routine. And Sammy looked at me, and then I taught the routine to Sammy.
Wow, you taught him.
Yeah, because the thing is I just went into the dance, which I've been working on with Charlie, but we didn't have music, so Charlie was just popping it out, and I was just doing it, and so it sort of got to Sammy, and Sammy was like, okay. He wanted to get into it too, and so I started showing him what to do. Of course, he knew what to do, but me, little I'm showing him what to do. And I got the part. Years later, here I am on NBC Follies with Sammy singing a love song. And then later I was on, he had a talk show and I was on there as well. And I had, first I'm a little girl with you, then I'm singing love songs with you, next time your mother. Because it seemed like he looked the same. He never changed. And I was the one growing up and getting older.
That's just amazing. Now, you were in the original cast of the off-Broadway production of Hair in 1968, but you didn't stay with the show when it went to Broadway. Why not?
Well, first of all, it was the first show the show that premiered, that opened Joe Papp's Public Theater. That was the first show. It was a limited run. We opened I'll never forget, October 17th, 1967, and ran to December. And in our production of Hair, it's like when Tom O'Horgan took it to Broadway, he changed. First of all, there was no nudity in our show. And also, it was more of an innocent show. And also, our number that we sang, when they did it on Broadway, they had, I guess it was a great visual of three girls in one dress. But that wasn't how we did it. It was all three of us being individual and doing our own thing. But to me, in the meantime, I had auditioned and got a role in George M.
So you couldn't go to Broadway in Hair?
It was like Hair was just from October to December, and then I got cast to George M.
I'm dying to ask you about the River Niger. You co-starred with Cicely Tyson, James Earl Jones, Louis Gossett Jr. It's a fabulous movie. Can you share some memories of working with those great legends?
Yeah, Glenn Turman was, in fact, the only Glenn Turman and I, who he just got a star on Hollywood Boulevard, Walk of Fame. Anyway, we are the only two surviving cast members of that original cast in the movie. I remember that where Cicely Tyson is concerned, she was extremely detailed when she worked. Even if we're doing something like sitting at a table, or because I remember we're sitting at a kitchen table talking about something, and there wasn't really any, but she found something to do. She had a napkin and she was doing something with it. She was always filling in. And I remember that so much so that I just finished doing the lead in a short film that's coming out. I just did it. And I remember there was a moment when I'm sitting at a table talking to my granddaughter, and that moment of Cicely Tyson came into my mind. And so I decided it was like I had it was a birthday, a cupcake with a candle in it, and they could have lit the candle and I just give it to her. But what I decided was there's a candle in front of her. So I took the match and I lit the candle. And I was really channeling back to Cicely Tyson to be doing something while I'm talking to my granddaughter that wasn't there in the script. And that was a totally Cicely Tyson moment that I channeled from back then.
I got to tell you that I had the distinct honor of being chosen by Lou Gossett Jr. to conduct his very last in-depth interview a couple of months before he passed away. He became a dear friend, and I miss him terribly.
He really was. I mean, working with him in the film was terrific. But then later on, he and I worked together on, I did a series called Palmerstown. In the series, he played my father. And so Lou was going through some stuff then, but he would show up and be there on set. And all of that stuff. And we sort of kept in contact, and not to, tell things, but we got a deeper connection because I've been sober now for 37 years. And we got another kind of connection, which was very deep.
Well, how lucky that you got to work with such a genius, a giant of a human being. And I must tell you as well, Miss Allen, in 1976, you got to play one of the greatest women of the last century, Rosa Parks, in a TV movie called The American Woman, Portraits of Courage. Was that one of your favorite performances?
Yes, it was. And also, the woman who produced that particular series, Jacqueline Babin, who I think she's one of those unsung heroes and women who have broke through a lot of doors. And for a long time, she produced All My Children for a long time. But she also did, at one point, there was an American version of Upstairs, Downstairs called Beacon Hill, which she also produced. And so Jackie Babin was really, I hate to say, ahead of her time, because she was at her time, but she was a woman who was a producer, who did some really classy, stellar work. And I'm grateful that I was involved in that miniseries, because there were some amazing women who participated, of all races, who participated in bringing that miniseries to life, with the characters that they played.
Did you do a lot of research to prepare to play Rosa Parks?
The thing is that when you're playing someone who people have placed on a pedestal, you really have to find their humanness, because people can place you on a pedestal, but that's not who you are as a person. And you have to get to the person. I mean, I've had people, especially in the last few years, are calling me a legend or an icon, or, bottom line, because I'm still doing something I've done for almost 7 decades,
Well, don't you think you are a legend? I mean, look at the trailblazing roles you've had. Look at the career you've had from the age of 5.
And I'm very grateful, and I feel very blessed, and I'm very happy that I'm still able to do it, that I'm still asked to do it. But what's interesting is that so many of the people who are casting and doing whatever, they're babies. They may not know who that. It's like, oh yeah, maybe I've heard whatever. And so you really cannot get into your feelings or ego about stuff. It's like, I'm so grateful when someone says, oh, we want to see, will you do a self-tape? Will you do a Zoom? Will you, and now sort of in-person auditions are coming back. But, it's like, sure, I love it. And as I was saying, I was just, this movie I just did, and there are a lot of young people working behind the camera, and they feel like they've discovered me. I just love it.
I think that's really amazing that the younger generation, especially these really young casting directors who have no sense of history at all, they are realizing who you are and what you've done. I mean, look at All in the Family. You appeared in a hilarious episode called Archie's Other Wife. You played a woman who was hired to convince Archie Bunker that he married you when he was at a convention. How did you like that experience?
What I loved about that experience is that Carol O'Connor, people think of Carol O'Connor as Archie Bunker. Let's talk about our iconic roles. However, Carol O'Connor was not Archie Bunker. His political views, who he was as a person, he was not that at all. And I remember particular situation where we're at the table read, and I'm a guest on the show. And around, so it's the writers, the producers, whatever. And literally they're reading through the script, but Carol O'Connor and they rework the script. They just start asking questions and breaking the script down. So Carol O'Connor's one thing was, why does this woman, because my character was a airline stewardess. They invite her to the party. Archie Bunker says his Archie Bunkerisms, and his pals, get her to play a practical joke on him, and she's ready for that because he's been Archie Bunker saying he says, yeah, I want to, yay, yeah, let's get him. But prior to that, it's like Carol's asking the writers, well, why would this lovely young woman want to do that? But let's break it down. And then one of them said, okay, then we'll just make her a hooker. And I'm sitting there. Meanwhile, I'm a guest, so it's like, and the person who's doing all the talking is Carol O'Connor, and so this writer says, well, we'll just, and Carol O'Connor says, no, we will not. We are not going to do that. You are going to come up with an idea as to why this woman, who is not a hooker, who is not have loose morals, is not any of those things, will do this. And I was just like,
that's very impressive. Really, it is. That's what you call having a lot of power on a show and being principled.
Yes, it was walking away from stereotypes and not really giving a shit. And so they came up with how to fix that, which was, she's a practical joker too, just like the rest of them. And he's saying his little crazy Archie Bunker isms. And when his friends say, let's get him, and I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And so that was wonderful.
Now, tell me, you mentioned Palmerstown, USA. That was a brilliant show created by Norman Lear and Alex Haley based on Mr. Haley's childhood. What was your experience working with Norman Lear and Mr. Haley?
It was great. I had done All in the Family prior to that, but I didn't. But Mr. Lear, it was his company, but he wasn't as hands-on. But he was hands-on with Palmerstown. And what was really fun at one point was Alex Haley had myself and Bill Duke, who played my husband, and to fly down to Henning, Tennessee, so we could get the feel of what the town was like, about what we were depicting. And going to Tennessee with Alex Haley was really quite amazing and wonderful. But the thing with Alex is he just had wonderful stories to tell. And Norman Lear was absolutely wonderful, absolutely accessible. It was a great experience. Unfortunately, the series, didn't get was short-lived, but I did have the honor that Palmerstown was the first primetime drama to have an African-American family unit. I mean, prior to, usually it's sitcoms, and which Norman Lear did a lot of them, like Good Times, Sanford and Son, and all of that stuff, which were great. But he wanted to do dramatic. And the only other dramatic show that had a Black core family, it was called Harrison Company with Bernie Casey, but there wasn't a wife. He was a widower. But this was a wife and a husband and their kids. And so it was a family unit. And I was, so that was the first. but also on Palmerstown was a young actor from Canada named Michael J. Fox. And when our show got canceled, I remember Michael calling me on the phone because we'd become friends. And he said to me, he said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I respect you, and I think I might go back to Canada. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just curious about your opinion. And I said, he's like, should I stay in the business? And I was like, Michael, well, what else do you want to do? He said, well, nothing. I said, what else do you think you can do? He said, well, nothing. And I said, well, you stick with it. So a few years later, after he explodes and he's doing Family Ties and filming Back to the Future, I'm doing a short-lived primetime drama on NBC called Behringers, which again, I was the first African-American actress to be a series regular on a primetime soap before Diane Carroll did Dynasty. We're at the NBC affiliates, and Michael shows up, and he's like, riding high, and my series it's tanking, but we're going to be there. And so I see him, and we hug, and I said, Michael, I've got to ask you a question. He's like, what? I said, should I stay in the business?
That's great. Now, I don't know if you know this about me, but before I started this show, I was a criminal court judge for 26 years. Did you know that?
Oh, and I'm not guilty.
You sure are not. But the reason I mention it is because in 1986, you played the prosecutor in a TV movie called The Penalty Phase, which was about a judge who has to decide what to do with a serial rapist who's clearly guilty, but the evidence was obtained illegally, so the judge might have to release this very dangerous man. Do you remember making that movie?
I remember it so well because Tony Richardson, the wonderful British director, directed the film. My character was originally written for a white male. And Tony said, I want her to play the part. And the network pushed back on it. And again, Tony Richardson did a Carol O'Connor moment. He said, she plays the part, I don't direct the film.
Well, did you know that that movie is played at law schools all over North America?
Oh, and I don't get a dime. Anyway, well, that's nice. Yes. And so he had said, I want her in this part. And they changed nothing about my character except for my name. And so it was sort of different because my character was, wanting to be judge and not Peter Strauss's character. And so I was a very right-wing conservative character.
Well, you did a very convincing job portraying the prosecutor. For any of our viewers who have not seen the movie, it's called The Penalty Phase. You can watch it on YouTube. Now, Miss Allen, in the late 80s, you were in the cast of a soap opera called Generations, which was, as you mentioned, the first soap opera to feature a Black family from its inception. But the show was canceled after only 2 seasons. Was that a really big disappointment?
Well, it was. And in some ways, it was never really given an opportunity. I mean, the show came on in the second half hour of the most popular soap opera on TV at the time, which is still popular, The Young and the Restless. So our show was half hour and came on in the second half hour of Young and the Restless. So it was like, in some ways, they never really gave it an opportunity or a chance. But the interesting thing was, we had gone to the NAACP, we talked to the NAACP that did not acknowledge soap operas. And myself and Sally Sussman, who's creator of the show, I remember that we went, a wonderful woman named C. Dolores Tucker, who was able to get us to I mean, I spoke at the Black Caucus. I was placed in the Congressional Record. I talked on the floor of Congress about minorities and, in front of and behind the camera, and talking about how generations helped, all of that kind of stuff. And what evolved from generations, though, is that generations begat Tyler Perry's To Have and Have Not. Generations begat Lee Daniels' Empire. Generations definitely begot Beyond the Gates. I really feel that you plant the seeds and you may not see exactly immediately the growth, but then through time, you see it.
Oh, for sure. You've had some incredible full circle moments. And of course, Miss Allen, for millions of people, you've been immortalized as Grace, the strong, independent businesswoman in Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. And over the course of 6 seasons, your character dealt with racism, inequality, her commitment to education, a public health crisis, the death of her adopted son, Anthony, alcoholism, being accused of poisoning someone, and so much more. Were you happy with the storylines for your character?
Absolutely, in every way. And also it was one of those very unexpected and wonderful gifts, that show. And not to sound woo-woo about it, but I remember I had gone to Sedona, Arizona, which is just beautiful. And I'm on one of those trails walking along, and the person I was with said, "Wow, maybe you'll do a Western." And I looked at them and I was like, they're not having any Black people. I haven't seen any Black people on Westerns, in a whatever, whatever. I get back and my agents say, "You have an audition for a show called Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman." I had no idea that I didn't know what it was. So I go to meet on it. And as I'm sitting in the outer office, a Native American actor comes in and he's dressed in, just this great regalia. Just beautifully dressed. And I'm just like, wow. I'm like, "You look amazing." And he said, "Oh, I'm so glad, because I just, landed, and I dressed in the Burbank airport because we were in the valley. So that's, dressed in the airport. So I'm not really sure. I'm glad it looks okay." I said, "It looks marvelous." I said, "Where'd you come from?" He says, "Oh, I live in Sedona." And I just went, okay. And then when I get into the meeting, to the room, it's a Western. But I'm starting to read with the other actor, the director walks in and he's late. And he walks in and I'm saying, the character at that time was saying, "Here, take this," to my husband. "Here, take this." And this man, and I looked and he said, "Well, wait for him to sit down, then take it." So it was a sort of the way I got the role in Palmerstown, because Bill Duke was very kind of stoic and whatever. And I was like flying off the handle. And Norman Lear liked that, because it was like absolutely kind of like this very stoic man with this woman who's like that. So it's a nice contrast. And so Henry Sanders had that kind of gravitas as well. And so, and I'm sitting there and I say, "Oh, come in and sit down." And they're like, oh. And so the thing, I met, that was a Wednesday. And Thursday, they offered me the role. That was like, but the interesting thing, the real interesting thing about it was I had already done 3 other television series and they weren't offering anything really. They were just like, "Well, this episode you do blah, blah, whatever." And I'm like, "Well, I've done da 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 da." And so I was about 5 or 6 years sober, and I called my sponsor, and I said to her, I said, well, they're not offering anything really. They're just saying, well, she said, well, when are you supposed to do it? I said, well, this Monday. And she said, well, if you don't do it this Monday, what are you going to be doing on Monday? Okay, Muriel, thank you. I'll do it.
You mentioned that you were 5 or 6 years sober. You've actually spoken very passionately and openly over the years about some of the struggles you've had to endure and overcome, both as an artist and a human being. You've talked about being sober, but I also want to ask you about the racism you've encountered within the industry. As you know, there were people who vigorously objected to a Black woman playing Sylvia in two Gentlemen of Verona. How did you deal with that?
It wasn't in New York. The thing is, I was the understudy and went on for Faye Templeton. There was a show called The Last Sweet Days of Isaac that was done, a musical written by Gretchen Cryer, and there was always a white woman playing I was asked to do it in San Francisco. And then Joseph Papp has always believed in, and what they called it back then was colorblind casting. So I'm playing the Princess of Milan. I've played Faye Templeton. So to me, I've never looked at anything that I could not do anything. So what happens in New York, two gents opens, I'm this goddess, I'm this whatever, da 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 da. I bring it out to do at the Amundsen, because we brought the show in the national tour to the Amundsen in Los Angeles at the Music Center. And I find out that there's hate mail. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, they didn't want to show it to me. And I'm like, no, I want to see it. And these people were writing things. Well, why is this N word? And people running after. I mean, it was just horrible. However, that's fuel for me. Just like when we're on stage in George M. and in between the first and second act, we hear that Martin Luther King has been assassinated. And the second act, we're going, we're singing all of those. We do a montage of, your Grand Old Flag and, his patriotic songs. And I went on that night. I remember, because a couple of people didn't go on. They were like, they're not going on. I did, because I wanted to just be in people's faces.
Good for you. Good for you. Well, one of your idols was Lena Horne. I'm wondering did she ever give you any advice about how to deal with racism?
She didn't say racism. Because, and this is my feelings about racism, is what Toni Morrison, the great Toni Morrison, says. Racism is a white person's problem. They're the ones who have created this. So the only thing I can do is to do my work, do it the best of my ability, and not be victimed or victimized by somebody else's illness.
But you have to be very resilient to be able to do that, because that illness can hurt other people.
Is that I absolutely believe the Black race and people of color have had to be resilient. I mean, but you don't think of it as being resilient. You just think of it as, I'm doing the next indicated thing. And to be able to be flexible, if you're being met with this, then you either go around that or create another this for you. I absolutely believe with all of my being that, yes, there may have been some roles I didn't get. Yes, there may have been a lot of things. However, I realize, like we're talking here today, I realize all of the shows I did do, all of the opportunities I did have, all of the people who took stands to say, no, we're not going to make her a hooker. Yes, she's going to play this role, or I won't direct this project. So there are people who are good people. I can't waste my time and energy on the ones who are not. I mean, I look at what's going on right now. Horrible. However, and yes, I have my beliefs and I have integrity, and there are things that that I stand for. But I mean, I look at it I focus on, when people go on about, oh, well, women in the industry and blah, 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 and all this. But then I stop and I think that I worked with Jackie Babin, who is a producer. I worked with Sally Sussman, who was executive producer and creator of Generations. I worked with Beth Sullivan, who was the executive producer and creator of Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. I worked with Vinette Carroll, the most amazing Black director on Broadway. I have seen examples of what some people are saying, well, they didn't have. Yes, they did. That's why knowing history is so important.
And that's why those casting directors need to know who you are, and here you have been sober for 40 years. What would you say, Miss Allen, to anyone out there watching this interview who hasn't yet found a way to overcome that compulsion to drink?
Well, the thing is that until the person wants to do it themselves, no one can say anything to them. Sobriety is about, I hate to say it. No, I don't hate to say it. I mean, I can only speak from my experience, is you can't do it for a loved one. You can't do it, God, for your children. You have to want to do this. You have to want to do this. But I suggest to people who are living with people who are having alcohol or substance abuse problems that they should get help. They can go to Al-Anon. They can go to Alateen. They can go to places, because people may think that, oh, well, it's the person who's drinking or using drugs or whatever who has the problem, but it permeates throughout the entire family.
Oh, it sure does. And I have to say that, we're also blessed that you have overcome it. Look at the work you've done. You had your one-woman show, Harlem Renaissance. You portrayed the legendary jazz queen, Florence Mills. You made headlines at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival when you did that show. And I have to tell you, some of the work you did in 2021 that really moved me on a TV show called 911. It was an episode called Parenthood. And you played a woman dying of cancer who calls the paramedics, not so much for herself, but for her daughter, who was her caregiver. I have to tell you, Miss Allen, that performance was a master class because it felt like you were living your own life. Do you know what I mean?
What had happened was in 2020, November 30th, my husband of 18 years had been killed in a car accident.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
He was coming home from work in his truck. And what happened was the truck went over the curb. It hit against a wall, and he was killed instantly. And it was at the height of, the pandemic was happening. And I'll never forget, I keep seeing this call from the sheriff's department, and I'm like, what's, I'm not really understanding. And so I call, and they say, are you, blah, blah, and I'm like, and so they put me on with someone. And it's like that thing between when it actually happens, it was like they said it with just sort of, there was an accident, and I'm sorry your husband didn't make it. And I just remember not believing what I was hearing. It was just like, what? Because they said it because of the pandemic, it wasn't people coming to your door, wasn't going to see a body. I don't know if I would have been able to do that. I was just in a fog. I mean, I couldn't. So when the 911 role came along, it was a way, in some ways, it was cathartic. And people kept asking me, how are you bringing this up all the time, every take? Now, I'm not going to go into, well, I'm, exercising. No, that's my job to do. But that was a way of using that stuff inside. Because the thing with grief is that it affects everyone differently, but it comes in waves. And to allow yourself to experience whatever that is.
That's a very, very healthy way that you expressed your grief. Now I understand why your performance on 911 affected me the way it did. And I didn't know all that. And I really can see that you were, in a way, healing yourself with that performance. That's what it felt like.
Maybe. I don't,
Yeah,
but
you really have an amazing ability to open your heart in such a way that makes all of us feel like we know you. And I got to say, I got to see you in 2017. You played Hello, Dolly at Saddleback. I know one of your idols, Pearl Bailey, played Hello, Dolly on Broadway in the late 60s. How did it feel to play the same role that one of your idols played?
Well, I felt it was wonderful, but I became close to Carol Channing within the last, a few years before she passed away. And so, and Carol would call me sister because she has some black roots. And so she was calling me, I have photos of me with her. I had a closer kind of towards the end with Carol, but with Pearl Bailey there was a wonderful actress in Hello, Dolly with her named Josella Reed. And for whatever reason, Pearl Bailey, when I met her, thought I was Josella. I never told her I wasn't. I squared up with Josella and told her, but I remember when Pearl Bailey came to see Two Gentlemen of Verona, and she came backstage afterwards and held court. And I had the dressing room she had. And she said, Joe, when I was doing Hello, Dolly, and you'd come into my dressing room and say, Miss Bailey, am I going to make it? And I said, Joe, you just stick with it. And you will. And look, you have. Meanwhile, I was never in Hello, Dolly with her. It was Josella. And so she would send me books. I had lunch with her, would send me books, call me Mama. She was Mama Pearl. And all of that, thinking I was Josella. But later years, I ran into Josella, and I said, I got to share something with you.
That's very touching, That's really very touching. I got to say, when you look back at your life, Miss Allen, are you happy with the career you've had, the choices you've made?
Yeah.
You darn well should be, because you are an icon and you are a legend. And it's because of your resilience. It's because of the fact that you're a trailblazer. It's because of the way you approach your craft, your life, your public image. I think you are just Amazing. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to appear on our show. You just finished a movie. You're about to start a play and you took the time to be on our show. Thank you so, so much.
So welcome. And the thing is you're reminding me of things I've forgotten, but I really haven't forgotten because it clicks that memory in and it's like, oh yeah, that's right. So thank you so much.
Our guest has been the brilliant and wonderful Jonelle Allen. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producers, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli of the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my editor, Isaiah Sharalampidis, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.